And welcome back. So imagine this situation for a moment. You're a young and foolish man in his early 20s who does something stupid. In fact, it's more than stupid. You break the law and commit a felony, but not the kind of felony you might watch in gruesome detail on Law and Order Special Victims Unit. No, in this hypothetical scenario, our admittedly foolish man commits a non violent felony crime. It is a crime, and he must pay his debt according to what the law requires. Specifically, let's say it has something to do with drugs or alcohol, or maybe he stole or vandalized property and no one got physically hurt or was threatened, or maybe he went around town forging checks, or maybe it was a white collar crime. The list could go on, but you get the picture. This person is then charged and sentenced and begins to serve the time for his criminal behavior. And while in prison, thankfully, he sees the error of his ways. He realizes crime, in fact, does not pay and is eager to finish his sentence and start a family, join a church, maybe even have a business of his own one day. And all of that is fine and good. But what if there are obstacles in his way after he gets out of prison and has served his time that prevent him from lawfully and legally protecting his precious family and business from violent criminals in our increasingly violent world? Well, in Arkansas right now, he can't, because in Arkansas, if you commit a felony of any kind, you lose your Second Amendment right to own a gun. Does that seem fair? Some think so. Does that seem right? Some think so. That's why there's a debate to be had. And that's what the law currently says. And so if you don't like what the law currently says, you'll need to change the law. But how? How would you go about it? Well, surely we wouldn't just give every nonviolent felon a weapon upon exiting prison. No, I think most Arkansans, to even entertain this idea, would want there to be a process and a way to prove you are, in fact, reformed and you are not going to go from being a nonviolent felon to a violent one. Democrat State Representative Vivian Flowers, who serves in the Arkansas General Assembly, has drafted a bill to restore Second Amendment rights to nonviolent felons after a process and a period of time, and it is sure to spark an interesting debate. And that's why I reached out to her and I wanted to have her on, and she agreed to come on. State Representative Flowers, thank you so much for being with us. Why don't you tell us about your bill?
Thank you so much for having me on, Paul. I I wanted so you've laid out a very interesting scenario because that is exactly the scenario. It's not hypothetical. That is actually what happened to my constituent. And I always tell people some of the best ideas and the best legislation that I believe that I've been able to pass has come from my constituents. And this is such a measure, such a draft bill. I got a call over 2 years ago from a constituent who had committed a drug crime, and he served his time. And you know, probably almost 20 years later, he had a family and a business and a job and a home, which he could not protect. His wife couldn't even protect it, not having been a felon, because they obviously lived together. And, um, you know, what was strange to me then is, his business was landscaping, which of course he accommodated customers who lived out in the county. And I didn't know that riding lawnmower jacking is a thing. And because it is, he was hesitant to have his son with him in running that business, unlike what people whose rights have, who maintain Second Amendment rights, can do. And it just struck me that this person committed a crime that was directly or generally a victimless crime. He had served his debt, and it had been, again, almost 20 years, and he couldn't enjoy the constitutional rights that the rest of us do. And in my mind, I was disturbed at the thought that he was still, being imprisoned, so to speak, um, when he had paid his debt. And honestly, When I started working on the bill, um, I was not even distinguishing between um, nonviolent and violent, because I feel like, if you're still a threat, maybe you ought to still be in prison. But if you're not, then you should have an opportunity to be made whole and to move forward and really have an incentive to continue to live, a peaceful, law abiding life. And when you're set apart from the rest of society and you're not able to protect yourself, you're not able to get housing, you're not able to get a job like the rest of us, I don't know how we expect that person to be successful. But as I began to work on the bill, I learned that Senator Stubblefield and Senator Caldwell were working on the issue, and we actually joined forces. And um, they kind of let me take the lead and dig into the issue. And we met with and were able to secure partnership and support from ACIC, and that's the governmental entity that keeps and maintains and shares the data around criminal imprisonment and prosecution and that kind of thing, convictions. Um, Also, the state police, their attorney helped us draft the bill and deal with the issue around the federal law, because federal law makes it so that, when you have committed a felony of any sort, that under federal law you cannot regain your Second Amendment rights. And then we also met with the Prosecutors Association and laid out every concern, made sure that we identified all felonies and some um, misdemeanors, like misdemeanor domestic battery. Made sure that there was a list of exceptions so that we wouldn't make a mistake for the intent of this bill.
Hmm.
And we just ran out of time last session. And obviously, since the laws have changed since then, we have come back. I pre filed the bill, and I pre filed it with no one on there just so I could get it filed, because we can't just put people's name on there. You have to get permission. And I filed it right before going out of town. So I pre filed the bill so that we could put it out there, go back to the drawing board, and make sure that all of the codes were in sync with the legislation. I met again with the Prosecutors Association. I've since met with the representative of the NRA, and a couple of other former members who I respect. And I think we have a good bill. We're waiting on the amendments to the original language to be made, and we'll have one final round of meetings with all the stakeholders, including the governor's office,
Hmm.
to ensure that all concerns have been addressed. And also, it'll give us a little bit of time to make sure that we get all of the supporting co-sponsors on the bill on the House and Senate side.
So, I mean, there's no question, State Representative Flowers, that this is a Second Amendment state, and not just for hunting, right? I mean, the people in
Yeah.
Arkansas, they believe in the philosophical idea of the right to keep and bear arms, and so anytime you're going to take that right away, you have to be it has to be really good reason for it, and so. This is a rare example, and maybe you would agree. I mean, the two parties at this point have never, you could argue, have never been further apart or more different. And yet, on this issue, I think this is something that Republicans could find themselves supporting from a Second Amendment standpoint. So you mentioned some other Republicans in the Senate who are receptive to this, but what do you think the level of support is generally just across the entire two chambers about this idea?
Yeah, funny you asked that, because I think, because we sort of um, assume where people are based upon partisan dogma, I would call it. Um, we we make those assumptions sort of guide our um, perceptions about what a bill really is. And I can tell you that I think initially there were some Republicans who thought that, like, what's her catch? But most people who know me well know that I have a concealed carry license, that I own before two, now three weapons, and I believe um, very deeply that that's my right to do so, and it should be a right made available to all law-abiding citizens.
Mm.
And in this case, law-abiding citizens who've made a mistake and committed a crime before, but paid their debt to society. And I get that we need to be careful as it relates to those who committed violent crimes. But for those whose crimes had nothing to do with violence or a weapon, it just makes no sense that after they paid their debt to society, that they would be prohibited from protecting their families or their homes or hunting with their families and friends. And so I think that this is a bill that everybody can get on board with. Even Mom's Demand is neutral on this bill.
Wow.
So I feel very confident that
Wow.
I, that's the that's one of my colleagues. I told one of my colleagues that the other day, and he said, what kind of witchcraft do you practice?"
Oh, yeah, I mean, that's
And
very fortunate. That's very fortunate.
I
Um,
told them no. I told them to watch out. But I think that there's again always this misnomer, because I think when we're dealing with tragedy and trying to figure out what common sense gun laws look like, we do often find ourselves on the opposite side, because there's such a fear and a perception about what making any change might mean. And hopefully working on something like this together could mean that we can work on other measures in the future, for the best interests of Arkansas and her people.
last question. I really appreciate you spending time with us and detailing this, but and this may be a long answer, but what do you envision that process looking like? Okay, let's say you establish whatever the criteria for a non-violent felon is, whatever that is,
Mhm.
but then how do they? When do they actually, under this bill, if it becomes law, how would they actually get their Second Amendment right back? It wouldn't be immediate, would it?
Well, I'm thinking about putting an emergency clause on it, but I mean, I don't know.
No,
It probably wouldn't be immediate, because and I get what you're saying. Because we'll need some time to flesh out the rules and regs. But the bottom line is, if you meet the criteria as having completed your disposition with the state, so, prison, parole, probation, fines, fees, and 10 years has passed since the date of conviction of a nonviolent felony, you are there you are not the subject of a criminal investigation, um, and I think one of the changes we made is that you are not the subject of a protective order or anything like that. Then there would be a process for you to um, begin the administration of um, transitioning to a status whereby you would be able to then own a weapon. And basically what we did is mirrored existing law. So for first time offenders who meet the criteria of first time offender, it's not a situation where somebody can decide, even though you meet this criteria, you still can't be made whole, or your charge can't be discharged and dismissed and sealed. That's basically what this is discharging, dismissing the felony and sealing the record, um, with some exceptions, for someone who has met the criteria. So it takes it out of the realm of politics, where some people get their rights restored and some don't. And we felt like, I mean, everyone I've talked to has felt like that is fair and reasonable in the case of nonviolent felony offenders.
State Representative Vivian Flowers, thanks so much for coming on the program. We really appreciate it, and thank you for educating the audience.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Appreciate
Alrighty.
you.
Folks, we're going to be right back
Okay,
with
take
State
care.
Representative Jeremy Wooldridge. Don't go anywhere.